one, a two, a 1, 2, 3, 4.
You hear people talk about music being as a language, but it reaches areas that are not only hard to articulate with words, but sometimes there are just no words to articulate that.
It's there to be, to speak to your soul. That's really what it's there for.
It's always just been my outlet. It really lets out my emotions. I can play it and people can feel what I'm feeling.
We couldn't help it. You walk down the street and it's on every corner. Where I live now used to be jazz clubs on the corner of 105. In my street, in the next street, in the next street, all the way down to Euclid.
It was an expression of people, regular folks.
And as you fall in love with it, you begin to embody the music, the culture.
I think Cleveland is a great place to develop yourself because there's plenty of gigs to be had here.
Here's one that was sold at Boyd's Piano Store at 18th and Central in Cleveland. And that's a very hot jazz record by a band leader named Fletcher Henderson.
I was 3, and I'm listening to Bazoo-dee-doo, gaboo-waboo, ba-boo-dip, gazoo-dee-doo, but Coleman Hawkins and Roy Eldridge playing Stuffy. And I never forget that. And so it all happened pretty quick. And I always really wanted to do that. That's what I wanted to do.
My dad was an active amateur musician. He played clarinet, classical. He liked Gilbert and Sullivan, musicals, and band music. And my mom was the sort of aficionado of lighter jazz.
My dad he loved Nat King Cole, and as a kid, like at night after everyone had dinner, he would be washing the dishes and he would sing these songs. So one of the first songs that I ever heard was When I Fall in Love and Unforgettable, those 2 songs. And it just made me want to explore that a little bit more and dig into the music that he knew.
Just one thing of just having drums and, of course, like every drummer, laying it out in your kitchen and just playing on pots and pans, that's one thing.
I played drums at first. I started playing drums when I was 4. And then when I was 11, I changed over to the trumpet. I learned how to play the horn in junior high school. And I learned how to read there. And then I got better and I liked it, so I joined the Navy, went to their school of music.
I remember taking my first solo and physically shaking because I was so nervous. But I just got out there and whatever came out, there was some type of applause, I would imagine.
I met Louis Armstrong when I was at the School of Music in the Navy. He influenced me. He came and gave a clinic at the School of Music. And it was wonderful.
So, what is jazz?
It's a collective of individuals that are all for one purpose, which is the music.
What is jazz music? All right, there's a lot of different answers to that question, and the answer is given by the people that play it.
Jazz really started primarily in and around New Orleans around the turn of the last century, around 1900. Within just a few years that it was all over the United States, including Cleveland. You will hear me talking about the black jazz scene in Cleveland and the white jazz scene because they were really quite separate until the 1960s when the 2 unions, the Black Musicians Union and the White Musicians Union, merged. At one point, African American musicians were actually prohibited from performing except in black neighborhoods.
It's music that belongs to the people, that's built out of oppression and celebrates struggle and triumph over struggle. In a nutshell, that's where the blues is coming from, that's where gospel music is coming from, and I think that anyone that plays this music can sense that, this idea of struggle and triumph over it. you know. It's a very democratic music.
To me, it means freedom. So that's how I always perceived it. I think that's what attracted me to it, is the idea that you can be spontaneous and, you know, there's an improvisational element that is involved in it. And in playing it and being around it for a while, it took me a while to figure out what is jazz really? Like, what makes something sound jazzy? And it's really the non-repeating, spontaneous nature.
You're taking some sort of materials of a composition, song, some musical structures, and then you offer your impressions of it.
I always look at jazz as more of a conversation because anyone can understand it without really knowing it. It becomes almost like a musical, spiritual thing that you're communicating through the music without actually speaking, whether there's lyrics there or not.
But the nature of the jazz individual is to want to go where no one has gone before.
It's the variety. It keeps it fresh. It keeps you listening, keeps you on your toes. It doesn't get stale. Like, why play anything the same way twice?
You know, a lot of these different cities have a certain vibe or a certain sound. It's like, oh yeah, that you can kind of pick up on a musician that, oh yeah, it sounds like they come from, you know, the Chicago area or the New York area or somewhere on the West Coast. Cleveland has a certain sound that's, in my opinion, that's very deeply rooted in the blues.
Look at the map. All right, when music traveled west to east, it came through Cleveland. When it traveled north through south, it traveled through Cleveland. So the music of all these cities is like moving towards here.
I think when I play a lot with Kenny, he's always playing the blues. We're gonna play the blues. It feels good. Maybe we're a working class town, you know? Like Cleveland's different than, I'd say, than the rest of Ohio. You know, we're this little northeast corner here, you know, so we're on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains, so we aspire to be New Yorkians. But yet we have our roots here in the Midwest, this Midwest mentality. So maybe that appeals more to the blues spirit.
When you travel around, there's a certain earthiness and grittiness that you get from this part of the country, maybe from Cleveland in particular. But Cleveland, Detroit, you know, Pittsburgh, Chicago, these kinds of cities, that's different from the coast. The coast can be very esoteric and weird or more intellectual. And
Cleveland is a place where roll down your windows and you will hear live music coming from somewhere.
There's going to be the culture of that city in the way the music is digested and then presented.
There's a very rich history here. I think traditionally in Cleveland, there's only been a certain selection of jazz that's been presented. You know, bebop was formed in the 50s. That was the mainstream music of the day, and they took, you know, a lot of those performers would take show tunes and pop tunes and rearrange them, and it became jazz.
When rock and roll became a greater presence starting in the mid-1950s, and of course has been accelerating ever since, jazz musicians, you could also see evidence of their music incorporating aspects of the pop music of the day. Now, there's nothing wrong with that because jazz has been taking popular music for its whole existence, basically, and doing their version of it.
It seems like straight-ahead jazz is what was presented most. But jazz is always, the point of jazz, you know, is pushing the music forward. It's always developing. And so, as jazz develops, there have been all of these offshoots with subgenres of jazz.
If things expanded, more things became, well, this is okay. That when new forms of jazz came out, many people in jazz reacted, oh, that's awful. Like when bebop came out in the 40s with Charlie Parker. And then when the 60s avant-garde, which included Cleveland's own Albert Ayler, somebody who really needs to be noted as a Clevelander who contributed to a form of jazz that put a lot of divisions into the liking of various forms of jazz. It's about what do you do? What's your approach to manipulating the materials you decide to play upon?
The music scene, I think, has always been like experimental in some ways. But I think you're starting to hear it more. Like you're starting to hear more of that stuff. But I mean, some of the greatest jazz, like free jazz musicians, came from Ohio. Like one of the ones that like influenced John Coltrane, Albert Ayler, is from Cleveland Heights.
Someone that takes a pop tune from today and rearranges it, that is very much composing in the tradition of jazz. And that is honoring how the music was composed back in the day. It just is drawing from the contemporary soundscape.
I think we've just added something different to a tradition that's already done so much. I think that the one thing that makes us different is because we use the popular music of our time. And I think that's what jazz musicians have always done.
The scene has changed dramatically. Jazz at one time was integral to American life, period. You know, back in the 1930s, into the 1940s, you know, the swing era, the big bands. Those were jazz bands. Everybody was attuned to say, the jazz fundamental, the swing rhythm. See, that at one time that's what there was. America moved to that rhythm, to dance to that rhythm. So it was part and parcel to the broader culture.
The ballrooms were places that people went to dance. Now, people used to go out for entertainment a lot more than they do now.
People would get out of their cars with fur coats on Euclid. It was an unwritten law, don't bother anybody that's coming to see the music. Bother no one. And they didn't.
Cleveland actually is deeply involved in the arts. Everywhere you look, there's a commitment to artistic expression.
That connection that I think that musicians have to the people, I don't think that happens everywhere else. It's like people feel something when they hear Ohio musicians play.
It's a demanding music for the listener. You have to commit a willingness to listen for the unexpected, or just expect the unexpected, and be able to lose yourself to go where the performer's going.
Just the people, you know, when the people are there and they're like happy to be there and they're not like, all right, what are you gonna play? It's amazing. And sometimes you have to like make jokes, or like you have to like look at them and be like, hey, like, yo, we're gonna love each other in this room. Like, come on.
You needed to make the audience happy so that you could keep the gig. You were looking to create something that would cause something to happen.
Like, you're gonna get a huge group of people coming out that are like young and old. And I think it's like really beautiful, and not just black and white either, or black or white. It's not an all black audience, it's not an all white audience. It's like really diverse. And that's all I think that's all you can ask for, right? You want to reach as many people as possible.
The difficulty now is getting the music to the people. It's not on the radio as much as I think it should be, and it's not in the press as much as I think it should be.
As far as like the respect aspect from the audience, that's hit or miss. It really just depends on where you go and like what you establish as a culture when you start playing. You know, there are some rooms where you go and like people are just listening to you, and it's really refreshing when that happens, because it doesn't happen a lot.
You know, the clubs have changed, because there used to be a Club Isabella. There used to be a boarding house. There were many clubs when I was growing up. In fact, you could walk from 105th and St. Clair to 105th and Euclid. There was a club on every corner. Every corner there was a club. Back in the day, white people could they could walk down the street and wouldn't be bothered by anybody, because they were going to see the music.
Jazz clubs that I used to go to, there was no cover charge. You would just go in, it was part of the atmosphere, and they sold drinks and they sold food.
It was on Euclid Avenue between 105th and 107th on the north side of the street. And every major jazz musician in the 1940s and early 50s played at Lindsay's Sky Bar.
In 1970 to 1975, there was a club called the Smiling Dog Saloon. This club, at that particular time, was the place to hear jazz and other kinds of music. Right, Weather Report was the first group to play that place. They played that place 6 nights a week for $3,500. After a while, the jazz concert thing started happening, which was based on kind of the rock concert. So for a single night, Weather Report could play a concert and make 3 to 4 times what they made for 6 nights. And what happened to the Smiling Dog Saloon? They had to close because all of their moneymakers were moving into playing concerts.
It's been a long time since there's been you could play 7 nights a week, playing all kinds of music.
They do all have a different feel, but part of it is just how the type of music that is more often booked in those spots.
A lot of venues were very particular to who they had in their venues and establishments, and now they're open to cover bands being in there. They're open to a rock band, and then the next night a pop band, and then a jazz quartet. That is what's really also merging everyone, and the fact that all of that can really be on one lineup.
Thinking of that, there are 3 excellent jazz clubs in the Northeast Ohio area that fulfill those needs. And I would say there's Blue Jazz in Akron, there's the Bop Stop, and there's Nighttown.
Nighttown opened in February 5th, 1965. I started with Nighttown 20 years ago, 1999. Special events were kind of rare at Nighttown before I got here. I think the music programming has kind of become more prominent in Nighttown's overall profile.
He uses a lot of artists from out of town, but even the ones from in town, are kind of within that more traditional type vein.
Of course, I want people to be aware of all the music that's happening here. This is sort of our wall of fame. Those are some of the more notable performers that have played here. We're doing about between 225 and 250 shows a year.
They're going for the full experience. They want to have company, drinks, food, and see a great show. So I think the dichotomy of that, the food versus the music, is a tricky balance.
There's a lot of history in jazz, and there's a legacy, and we're proud to say we're part of that.
I have a long history of many fantastic shows.
I'm just trying to bring it into the 21st century and be respectful of its past and make for a good future.
I'd say my favorite place to play by far is the Bop Stop.
It's a quieter audience. They're there to hear that show and that music.
Being trained as a live performer, I feel like I understand better what artists are looking for from their overall experience at a venue, and regarding sound, and you're just being taken care of with respect.
The nice thing about Gabe is he tries to have a lot of different variety, even speaking within the jazz umbrella.
There's like this really deep love for art, just in general. And it's about the artist on every level. I can go in, and if I want to make jungle noises through my saxophone for 3 hours, Gabe is like, bet, let's do that.
If you have happy players, the music will sound better on stage, and it's also creating a space for Northeast Ohio, and we want to attract talent to the region.
The audience is right there with the band. You can't put too many people in there. You're playing mostly acoustically. They can mic it a little bit if you need. Maybe you use a little monitors, but it's really not that necessary. And it's intimate, and the audience can feed off the band, and the band can feed off the audience. And that's the magic of a really good show.
So, most venues, it's a restaurant with music, or the main attraction is food and drinks, and then they have music, and it's promoting that whole combination. Here, it's all about the music. We do have a small food menu. We do have a bar.
There has to be more belief in the artist in this town in general if we're going to have our music grow. And I don't think that other venues do that as much as the Bop Stop. It'll give as many people a chance. When there was no place to play, there was this spot that a few of my friends started called The Spot. That's what it was called. And you go into this basement, and there's all this equipment. There were a bunch of musicians booking to play down there, and the owner of that spot, Tony Tropy, said, "Man, there's these musicians around, and they don't have a place to play. Let's make a place." And he made Blue Jazz.
there's a club in Akron called Blue Jazz, which is a great club. It's a great jazz club, one of the best. And we play there a number of times a year.
Blue Jazz is fantastic because there's a certain homage or respect paid to the jazz musicians there. It's a whole production, and I kind of like that. It kind of like says, yes, thank you for practicing. Thank you for the time you've put into becoming good at your craft. And there are people here that really care about this, and we want to provide them a nice professional show.
And I think that if you don't have like patrons that are willing to like sacrifice a little bit for the music, you can't have audience growth. Blue has kind of like re-energized the entire jazz scene.
Let me just weigh in on this,
Yeah.
Jazz has always been a part of our national social structure. Because it has that unique ability to bridge differences and bring people together from every walk of life, race, economics, gender, sexual orientation, religion, politics. When Benny Goodman did his classic 1938 concert, he brought in Count Basie, Teddy Wilson, Lionel Hampton, black musicians, playing right along with Benny Goodman, Harry James, and Gene Krupa. That was the diversity that jazz had the ability to bring together before politics and sports and what have you. It also brought women diversity, not only covered race, but gender. Some of the earliest stars in jazz were vocal or female, but later on with instruments.
Mary Lou Williams was their piano player, and she was probably the most accomplished musician in that band. She was an incredible arranger. She arranged for Benny Goodman, Count Basie, Dizzy Gillespie. She even arranged for Duke Ellington, and he's considered one of the best arrangers in jazz. She was fabulous.
But also in terms of sexual orientation, jazz bridged that gap very early because Duke Ellington's main collaborator was Billy Strayhorn, who was openly gay and made no secret of his sexual orientation. So jazz, just to me, is diversity and inclusion.
There were a lot of musicians that were very gracious in listening to me, step all over tunes and make mistakes. They were encouraging, like a family thing, for whatever that reason was, as to why they wanted to see me succeed in music.
Ernie Krivda, he put no limits on me, and especially, and I'm in a world where women empowerment, it's really becoming huge, and I love it. And he even kind of put that in me as a child of, do not be the best woman out here, be the best musician.
The other thing about jazz music and jazz musicians is that we don't simply draw inspiration from, people that are in our idiom, or people that play the instrument that we play. We're influenced by music from a broad range of cultures.
So when I'm in a band, because I'm on stage, I'm listening to everything else. So I'm not really like, I'm not trying to play, because how can I listen to them if I'm communicating on my instrument?
One of the beautiful things about Cleveland is that it's at just the size where it's just large enough where you have this incredible pool of talent, where there's just a lot of amazing musicians here. I mean, there's some incredible musicians in this area. But at the same time, it's not so big where it diminishes the opportunity. So you have a whole lot of musicians that are playing at a very high level that all know each other, and there's a lot of opportunity to grow.
I think Cleveland is a great place to develop yourself because there's plenty of gigs to be had here. And if you want to play, you can find gigs here.
It is very, very tight-knit, which is a good thing. It's like a family. When you study and you reach a certain level and you're accepted into that family. I mean, these are like your cousins and aunts and uncles and stuff.
It's just good memories, that's all, real good memories. Because we call each other and we tease each other about stuff we've done. Appropriate and inappropriate. Okay.
What's great too about jazz is that I could have something going on, whether I did not say anything, but because we were playing together, they could feel it. So by the time we got to break, they're like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, you all right? That's that jazz community that I'm talking about. And when you're sensitive to who you're playing with, that it's amazing.
Always has been. The players just change, that's all. We're always close when we lose somebody. We all come together.
Like Boston, California, Connecticut, it's different. It's more the community, you can feel it, and there's a lot of love. Here, we're getting there. We really are. We're getting there. What I realized was different here than everywhere else. The musicians here are spectacular, and not all of us know it.
Well, we're smaller than some of the other towns, but we're tight and we're close. Cleveland has nothing to be ashamed of, nothing. There's just some good musicians out here to the world to play.
But we're all in this together, and there's always someone better. There's always someone worse, and it's like you just try to help each other become the better individuals and better to achieve their musical goals as needed.
Especially with the type of talent that we have here. So I think that from what I've seen over the past 30 years is some movement in the jazz community. You know, in my opinion, I think the energy level kind of dropped for a little bit, but then the past 10, 15 years or so, it's just been increasingly getting stronger and stronger. And I think part of that is because some of these younger musicians are seeing opportunities to create their own path.
The arts in general is like what gives our children the ability to think in the abstract. And it forces you to use your imagination to get outside of what's normal. And to me, like, I think that's like what all the arts do. So music and music education is an extension of that. It's just a way to get people to kind of like get in touch with their feelings, their emotions, and like the more metaphysical sides to life.
You know, when you're asked to dig into all these things and learn something like music, you know, it creates a lot of different connections in your brain and the little synapses, and it makes you discover other cultures and all those kinds of things. So in terms of the education component, I think it's very valuable in terms of just being a more whole person.
Now, jazz was not always taught in schools, but it was always taught and it was always learned. There used to be the mentoring system, whereas older musicians would hire younger musicians and they would play and they'd travel around and the older musician would teach the younger musician how to play that particular gig. And so you learned how to make that particular gig a success. Then, you know, if you're into it, you go and you work for somebody else and they teach you how to make that gig a success. And so, you know, you play in enough situations, you learn how to make music work.
Well, we had older musicians like Jack Town, Lawrence Jackson, drummer, Chink Stevenson, Lamar Gaines, both bass players. And they would call us as youngsters to come play with them. And we meet Weasel Parker and Willie Smith. These are names that go way back. And they brought us along.
My mentors, I mean, I owe them my life. Okay, you can never really repay them. People like James May, who like started the music program at the Salvation Army Miles Park that got me into playing. I don't think that I would be anywhere without them. I mean, you put me in a different circumstance with different mentors, I'd be a different person, you know? But because of those, like, I owe those people my life. Like, I wouldn't even be doing this stuff if it wasn't for them. So, yeah, they're everything.
Jazz has actually moved into education so that it's kind of a major component of what the jazz culture is today. This is markedly different than what it was.
So I started teaching music when I was around 19 or 20 years old. We started this after-school program in the Cleveland area in the Woodland East 55th neighborhood. And I remember just handing out flyers in the projects trying to get people, you know, some free lessons. I would just take whatever instruments were being donated and whatever kids showed up, just try to teach them. This went on for like a couple years, and I did it twice a week. And every time I would teach, you know, I would leave and try to think, what did I do wrong? You know, what worked? And just kept trying to make it better and better.
I actually try to teach the way that I wish I learned. I really focus on really being sensitive to my students. I always try to be aware of them and know where they are in their journey musically. I always try to be very sensitive to what they want to do, and I don't want to push them outside of, I don't want to play anymore because this is not fun for me.
I try my best to like get students to feel what they're trying to hear, you know, hear it, and then add a physical, like a metaphysical connotation to it. Like, how does it affect you emotionally? And then how do you like make that happen musically, so that when you play in front of an audience, you have the same thing.
And I'm not one of those individuals, and I know a lot of teachers that don't dictate to students like you have to play this way or you have to play that way, but more so, if you're aiming for this, you definitely want to be familiar with this. If this is what you're trying to do, these are some tools to get you there.
We're in a city and in a world that anyone can influence you. And I'm lucky enough that, or we are, that we're born in a time where we actually have access to it before people have to go to records and play it. And a lot of the time, when you look back on interviews and you listen back to old musicians, they talk about how a lot of the times they listen or they learn songs in the wrong key because they were listening to a record and the speed wasn't right. How fortunate are we that we can just go to YouTube or Spotify or iTunes and just pull up a song and learn it immediately, or slow it down and now we have charts.
You can learn so much from YouTube University, as it's sometimes referred to. And then if you're doing that and then you're working with people, you can learn a lot of material. Even with having people that have studied both, in some ways it doesn't really matter how you go about acquiring that information, but that you acquire it is the important thing.
The people who are probably doing as much as anything are teachers at the high school level, exposing greater numbers of students to the fact that jazz exists. And if the teacher plays and is really active themselves and have some substantial knowledge of it, then that goes even further by maybe transmitting their enthusiasm for them doing it to the students and say, hey, this is really neat stuff. It's very stimulating. It's a lot of satisfaction in doing it. This is something really you ought to try doing.
Now, when you learn in schools, you learn kind of the music through the theory of music. You learn about what can help you make the music work.
By having access to these resources, sometimes students don't take the necessary steps to fully internalize the music. And that only comes through practice and repetition and experience on the gig, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, what are your deficiencies, and how can you address some of those going forward.
I teach at Tri-C, and I teach ensembles, and I have a group called a Jazz Workshop. But I got the workshop a monthly gig. This is you're going into this club. They don't know who you are. You have to win them over. You have to play, and you have to have them be interested in what you do. Why should they keep us? Why should they keep us coming if nobody likes us? Or if we're just, if it's just a dry expression of a curriculum, they have to play, and they have to play with life, and they have to make life happen.
It has changed things. Jazz used to be street music. You learned it by being with the musicians that were playing in the street, with the musicians that were performing out in the field, so to speak. Now you can get a degree in jazz music. There are videos available that dissect solos, that dissect other jazz, like different jazz styles from the past. So I think institutionalizing it has made an impact, and there are pros and cons to that, but I think that's one of the biggest impacts is putting jazz music into higher education or into the education system.
But I think you lose something when you codify it or put it in a university setting. It just seems to be like it turns it towards this intellectual experience, and that's really not what music is about at all. It's there to be, to speak to your soul. And that's really what it's there for.
If you take music and you put it into an institutional setting like that, where that normally wasn't the case, then you can essentially study that music without the experience of the people, if that makes sense. Like originally, jazz was learned and taught with the people, not only the people playing it, but in the community itself. But now you can go and you can learn it apart from that community. And I think some of the impact of that could be that the community can then become disengaged as to what that music is.
Now, you're not learning from band leaders, stylists. You're learning from a theory of jazz. And no matter what school you go to, there are countless jazz programs, but they're kind of all learning the same way. And it's not that what they're learning is bad or wrong. It's just that it's all coming in the same way. And if it comes in the same way, it will go out the same way. I can get into a thing where I can find all kinds of fault with jazz education today. And I don't want to do that, because if it wasn't for jazz in education, I do not know where jazz would be.
You look at Downbeat, and there's just so much activity, new recordings, young people being written about as up-and-comers, just right and left every month. But the problem is, in our society, jazz is an underground music.
I believe the music always will be here. There always will be people that will want to play it.
Jazz is a survivor, okay? It survives everything. Music changes, but jazz is constant.
This is what I'd like to see. There's like all of these students of the music, and yet you look at the audiences and they don't reflect that.
With all these places that are offering jazz courses, where are these people going to go with all this training? What are they going to do? I mean, that's a very open-ended and at times a real vexing question, because here you have opportunities for people to explore, to satisfy their curiosity about sounds and music at places where they can engage in the study at a very high level.
I'm not sure that, there's implanting the idea this is you gotta love this. This is something that you love to listen to. I don't see enough of it, and I worry.
There's a young contingent of musicians that are coming up, but we have to see if they choose to stay. It's hard in Cleveland. It's hard being a young jazz musician in Cleveland, because a lot of people don't think you know anything about the music. They don't think you know what it means to sacrifice. What I'm hoping is that the young musicians in the area now see the value in that, and that they too take that journey to find the last gems of the previous generation. Musicians like Eddie Backus and Ernie Krivda and Kenny Davis and Cecil Rucker and all these great, Perry Williams. I can go on and on. Seek them out. Go figure out what this music means to them, and they try their best to carry that on their shoulders everywhere they go.
It's important because it's American history, and everybody needs to know where it came from and why it sustains itself, how it sustains itself.
I still love to listen to music. And I think it's really important for young musicians to you got to love to listen to it, and because that's what keeps your inspiration alive.
I think it's going somewhere huge, and I think, especially Cleveland, I think we're going to be like the new New York, bigger than California scenes, because there's so many musicians that are actually coming together, and we all play something, and we're all merging. And before, here in Cleveland, there were a lot of different spots. There was jazz here, R&B here, pop there, rock there, but now it's we're all coming together. I'm in 5-6 different bands. I'm playing blues and pop and rock and R&B, and so everything is merging, and everyone's happy and excited about it.
So what kind of advice would you give to aspiring jazz musicians?
Well, Charlie Parker put it like this. He said, learn your instrument, learn the music, and then forget about everything and just play. That's how he put it.
Make as many mistakes as you can. What's the worst thing that can happen, right? You play a wrong note, nobody's going to end up in the hospital because you played an F and you were supposed to play an F sharp. We're not brain surgeons. We're just trying to make some music and trying to bring joy to people.
It's a life journey. It's a lifelong journey. And as you fall in love with it, you begin to embody the music, the culture.
Get out there, just go outside and find a musician. If you find one, then I'm sure you'll find another. So if you just know one person, grab them and be like, hey, where's the next musical place you're going?
The more questions you ask, the more aware you'll become. And then as you experiment and start incorporating some of these ideas, you'll find your voice.
Listen and ask questions. learn. It's not that hard. And you become a friend to the music.
Until the real thing comes along. And ladies and gentlemen, with that tuneful bit of melody, we bring you greetings and salutations from Andy Kirk and his Clouds of Joy, featuring Mary Lou Williams, America's foremost swing pianist. In this program, all delightful popular dance melodies played to you directly from the Trianon Ballroom in Cleveland.
See, this is their theme song, and like many theme songs of the big bands, it wasn't a particularly hot number because they want to announce the band